what's the pay yourself first method?
Pay yourself first is a great strategy because it can be baked into every other strategy out there, and probably should. All it's referring to is simply the idea of making sure that every time you earn some money, you set some money aside for yourself. Because again, the most common process that people follow is the default process when it comes to their money. Their money gets into their checking account and then they just spend. And maybe at the end of the month, they might save some money, but in reality, we all know how hard that is to actually do, right? It's much easier to spend that money accidentally than to set it aside for the future. So the idea of paying yourself first. So when it comes to the pay yourself first strategy, I've also heard it referred to as the profit first. So maybe you've heard it one way or the other, but pay yourself first strategy is a pretty simple process to follow. And what it means is the picture on the right-hand side shows you the two most common methodologies, or excuse me, it shows you the most common and then the pay yourself first strategy. The most common one they call broke people in this visual, maybe not the best name, but let's just stick with it, is everything goes into your checking account. You pay your expenses, you pay your debts, you spend your money on what you're doing. You maybe have some luxuries, maybe that's just eating out and then your fun money. And then maybe at the end of the month, you save some money, right? Like that's the most common default that pretty much everybody has. That's why we're pretty poor at savings and investing, because that's the strategy that we all use. The pay yourself first method is simply making sure you take money out first, and then the rest of the money goes into the checking account for your expenses, your debts, your spending, your luxuries, your fun. Like it's as simple as that. It's just inverting that pyramid. Instead of saving being at the bottom, you bring it up to the top so you make sure it's getting done, and then you just spend what's left over. It's a much easier process to follow, especially from a behavioral finance perspective. So with that, I can actually show you how easy it is to execute inside of Sequence. So now that we're back inside of Sequence, let's keep using the same example of John making $6,000 a month. The best way to do this is you're always going to be adding your checking and savings accounts, because that's most commonly what people have. So we'll have those here. These are your existing checking and savings account. And again, the way that most people set up their money is when they talk to their employer, they give them their bank and routing information, and 100% of their money goes into their checking account, and that's where they spend, right? Like that is in that picture, the broke people process, but it's what everybody does because nobody's taught differently. When it comes to pay yourself first, the way that I like to do it and the way that I have it set up for my own account is that I created a pod. In this case, we'll call it pay yourself first. Oh, there we go. And we'll do all caps because it's so important. And so here's our pay yourself first pod, right? Again, pod being a new bank account that's open through Thread Bank that allows me to have a checking number or a routing number, account number, debit card. And here's how simple it is. So in this case, I'm going to create a rule, drag it over to pay yourself first. And again, I want this to happen every single time I get paid, right? I'm paying myself first. So I'm triggering by incoming funds. So the trigger is when funds are received from my income or from John's income, we can either transfer a fixed percentage or a fixed amount. Again, this will be completely up to each person based on what their current spending is. If you're on a shoestring budget and don't have much wiggle room, then it's probably best to start with a fixed amount of $5, $10, $50, something that you probably won't feel much impact on. But if you're making good money and you're just spending frivolously on a lot of things like most of us are, you might say, well, I want to do a fixed amount or a percentage of my income. And in this case, I want to do 5%, or John's going to do 5% of his income is going to go into pay yourself first. And so every single time he gets paid, he's going to be getting $6,000 of pay, and 5% of that, or $300, is going to be going over to his pay yourself first. And this is the strategy. Like, it's as simple as that. The remainder of the money is going to be going to the checking account. So trigger incoming funds, right? And then you'll note it added on top of that. So the remaining 95 is going to go to checking. Rule's done. It's as simple as that. Now you can create strategies on this pay yourself first. Like, we can start to invest that money. We could actually have that be the rainy day fund. Like, we can
Right.
The nice thing about this is like we can stack a lot of these principles. Like this pay yourself first is essentially baked into the 50, 30, 20 strategy. It's baked into, Ramit said, these conscious spending plan. Like all of these things tend to account for it. But if you just want to get started in the most basic sense possible, this is a great way to do it, because all of a sudden you're just creating one singular pod. You're setting a set amount of money every single pay period, or a set percentage, and you're just going to grow that account. Now, I would suggest you probably want to start making sure that you do have a rainy day fund then that comes out of that, or you have an emergency fund, or you can have your pay yourself first and a rainy day fund and an emergency fund. Like it depends how complex you want to make this and how sophisticated you want your map to be. But in reality, if you just take the baby step of creating your first pod and creating a rule to send a small amount of money or whatever you feel comfortable sending to that every single time you get paid, that alone is a huge step in the right direction and something you can build on as you continue to make more money and get more comfortable as less money is getting deposited into your checking account, making sure that it feels comfortable, and then continuing ideally to up it by a few percents or a few dollars each month, each quarter, every 6 months, or every year.